All right, we are ready to go. This is going to be another one of those nights where you don't see me, so you'll just have to listen to my voice. We are going to continue from where we left off last time. Let's do a very quick, short review. I have to check a lot of instruments again. All right, I think we're all right. This is a course in AstroDynamics, which is very different from natal astrology. In natal astrology, you look at the natal horoscope and nothing more. The idea being that it is a moment, and in that moment, everything that comes out of that moment will be shown in it. So we're looking at things now as they change. We refer back to the natal horoscope in most cases. In some cases we will not. But we're looking at the different methods of understanding periods of time. The first thing we did was to divide a lifetime into segments. We looked at the first half of life versus the second half of life, and we astrologized those segments. And we looked at thirds of life, the first third of life, the second third of life, and the third of life. And we astrologized there also by indicating what astrologers over the centuries have found as things that occur in those different divisions of life. Now, there is not a lot of astrology in that. Like if we say that the last third of life is ruled by Saturn and Jupiter, we can look at Saturn and Jupiter in the natal horoscope of someone and get a very vague idea of things that will be in play in that latter third of their life. But we want something more accurate, something more specific, and basically what we're doing is funneling down. So then we began working with the most traditional tools for forecasting and predicting. The first thing we looked into was the transits, because we did that because of popularity. Some astrologers only know transits as a means of forecasting and predicting. They don't know any of the other techniques. And so we chose that because it's very common. Transits are the relationships of the planets in the moment in their relationship to the natal chart. And we noted that you can look at all sorts of transits, but the transits of outer planets are more important because they stay in relation to a natal planet for a longer period of time. And we noted that the most important transits are the transits that are conjunctions with a natal planet or oppositions. For some astrologers, those are the only ones that are used. They won't use squares and sextiles or trines or things like that, but they will only use the conjunction and the opposition. We're going to be a little more liberal than that. The next thing we did is we looked at secondary progressions. And when we looked at secondary progressions, that is where each day after birth represents 1 year after birth. And we watched the movements of the planets in the days following the birth. And again, in this case, we looked only at the inner planets. We looked at Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, sometimes Mars. The reason being that the outer planets move so slowly that, like Pluto, for example, is virtually in the same position throughout life. And so if you're looking for something at age 35 and you try to look for a progressed Pluto, you're not going to find much. There may be an influence there, but I don't know that that has ever been explored by astrologers. I suppose you could get things down to a second and do all sorts of technical things, because astrologers are noted for doing a lot of technical things in order to try to get an understanding. Then we took the next thing that we looked into were primary directions. And primary directions are very different from the transits and the progressions. The transits and the progressions are dependent on the orbital revolution of the Earth and the planets. But the primary directions are dependent on the axial rotation. And since the Earth rotates on its axis very quickly, things change quite quickly. And what you do with primary directions, or what we try to do, is take the primary angles. That is the ascendant and the midheaven. And we progress them at a degree, the midheaven, for example, goes a degree per day. And what you do is you take sidereal time after the birth time, and you see where the ascendant and the midheaven are. The midheaven always moves 1 degree per day, but the ascendant will move either faster or slower, depending on where you are on the Earth and what kind of a rising sign you have, whether you have a sign of long ascension or short ascension. All right, so that is what we did next, and then we started looking at lunations. When you're dealing with lunations, you're getting the time focused in a smaller range. If you know that there's a secondary progression, that is the Sun coming to a conjunction of Saturn, for example, that whole aspect within orb will take 3 years during the application, culmination, and separation. Within that 3-year period, you want to know sub-periods. And some of those sub-periods can be gained by looking at new moons and full moons. And then we have come to what we're doing now. All of these things that we have looked at, whether they're primary directions or transits or secondary progressions or lunations, all of those, we wanted examples. Now, the first examples that we used along the way were from my chart. And my chart turned out to be devastatingly accurate, because I know when things happened, and I know the horoscope very well, because you work on your life all of your life, and so you're familiar with their own horoscope. But that wasn't satisfactory for me. I wanted us to test out the theories of progression and prediction, and I wanted to check them out. And so what we did is we took all of the presidents that I have lived under. And the first thing we did is to see at their inaugurations. We looked at inaugurations. And when we looked at the transits of presidents relative to inaugurations, we didn't find very much. About the only one that had really consistent transits was Barack Obama. That turned out to be very accurate for his inaugurations. So what we did is looked at the secondary directions for all of the presidents at the time of their inauguration. Once again, we did not find a lot. We found a little bit. We found a few connections, but not a lot. We looked at primary directions, but not too closely. We found a little bit there also. So in short, I was unhappy with demonstrating any of the techniques that we have been studying with regard to presidential inaugurations. So instead, I wanted to check. I thought, well, maybe the inauguration isn't the result of the individual. Yes, people do have political ambitions, and they work toward those ambitions. Joe Biden, for example, for many, many years has wanted to be president and only finally made it in his dotage. So I thought that maybe if we took other things that were important events in a person's life, that we would get a better check of astrology. So that is what we're doing. We began the last time we met, I think there were some question and answer sessions in there, but we began looking at the same presidents, but at highlights in their life. Like for Franklin Roosevelt, we took the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Certainly a very important time in his life. That's when he declared war, and nobody could counter him in that. And for Harry Truman, we took the atomic bombs. And now we are up to Richard Nixon. And this is the chart of Richard Nixon that is displayed. And we want to look at that for a bit. And then we want to look and see if there are any transits and secondary progressions. In what we're doing, this inner circle is the natal chart. The middle circle are the secondary progressions, and the outer chart is the transits. So let's look a little bit at the natal chart of Richard Nixon. He has the sun down here in the 5th house. He was a reasonable orator, which 5th house rules oratorical skills. But the sun forms a opposition to Neptune, which indicates, in his case, a certain amount of psychological instability. When he was, at the time of his impeachment, he was talking to portraits in the White House with regard to his situation. Now, actually, Richard Nixon, beside having all of his petty political scheming, was actually a very good president. He was one of the few presidents that had a foreign policy, and he had a good economy under him. In fact, this was before the times of polarization that we see now. The way it worked was that Richard Nixon was a more liberal president, even instituting wage and price controls, than Bill Clinton. So he was pretty liberal, pretty successful, but he was not psychologically stable. So you want to see the reason for the psychological instability is we look at this cluster of planets down here that are in late Sagittarius and early Capricorn. Those are things that are subjective things, but they all oppose Pluto in the 10th house. And this is, he had a subconscious desire for power, a wonderful desire for power, and that compromised him. All of those planets, the Pluto and the little cluster of planets in the 4th house, sextile Venus in the 6th house. He was popular. Extreme liberals didn't like, he wasn't popular for them, but he was popular. He was beloved. Women liked him. So now we want to see what happens at the time of the Watergate break-in. For people who do not know what the Watergate break-in was, it was during the campaign for his second term of presidency. He had his crew, it was sort of a motley crew, break into the Watergate Hotel and get into the files of the Democratic Party that would give them an advantage, and they could then ensure the election. Now this didn't all, this was done before the election, but it didn't come out until after the election. Now the situation is that Venus, here in the progress chart, Venus right up here, is trine to these planets and is sextile to Pluto. And he had won the election without the information from the break-in of the Watergate. But the moon is square to the natal Saturn. And that indicates, and it's in, this is all in the 8th house, which is secrecy and espionage and all sorts of things like that. So this clearly indicates that there was a blind spot in his thinking, and he eventually had to pay for that blind spot. There's not very much going on in the transits. The only thing that really seems significant in the transits is that Pluto is exactly square to its natal position. And it's exactly square to Mars. And that would be Mars-Pluto combinations are abuses of power. So we can see there is enough here that this is much more convincing than what we saw with either with any of the planets at the times of the inaugurations. We can see there are motivations here, and we can see that there's timing, that things were ripe, and that in wanting to ensure things and wanting to make a lead pipe cinch of things, breached ethics and the law. And got in, it cost him the presidency. And to some extent, it even cost him his sanity for a temporary time. All right, let's. All right. Oh, what's happening here? Well, I'm not finding a way that I can reduce the image here. Let's try it again. All right. This is the horoscope of Gerald Ford, who was vice president at the time of the Nixon impeachment. And one of the first acts he did was to pardon Richard Nixon. And it caused a big outrage. This was done very early in his presidency, and it was done at the time that Evel Knievel, the famous motorcycle daredevil, was trying to leap across Snake River Canyon. And while the whole nation was obsessed with Evel Knievel, Gerald Ford gave Nixon a complete pardon so that he was absolved from any guilt. Now let's look at the chart of Gerald Ford. The sun is down in the third house, and the sun is sextile to Mars. He was a man, and Mars is on the ascendant, which means he was a physically fit man. At one time, he played a lot of football when he was in college, and he was a reasonably good athlete. But at the same time, Mars is square to Mercury, which his athletic ability was not in special dexterity or coordination or anything like that. People used to joke when referring to his life, what we're seeing in this Mercury square Mars is they said he couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. And some people even said that he played too much football without a helmet, and it impaired his mentality. Those are all snide things that people say, but that's what was in the air when he came into power. Now this is a very unusual thing. Gerald Ford had never in his life been in any national campaign. What happened was he was the head of the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House. And what happened is that before Nixon resigned, in the weeks before that, the vice president, who was Spiro Agnew, was caught for tax evasion and was forced to resign. And there was not a replacement vice president. So when Nixon resigned, according to the Constitution, the Speaker of the House is next in line to assume the presidency. So we have someone that was never nationally elected. He was only a representative from the Michigan area, and that's the only place that he ever was elected. Now, if we look at this, the 10th house is the house of fame, and we find Uranus there, and Uranus is a planet of accidents. You might say that he became accidentally famous. Venus is trine Uranus, but there was nothing, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But there's nothing that would indicate that this was a long-held desire of his and that he had accomplished this with his efforts all of his life. All right, now let's look at the progressions at that time. The sun is down in the 5th house. It's in 20 degrees of Virgo, and it is trine to Mars, which is quite fortuitous, and it is sextile to its natal position. In fact, it's right in between the orb of the trine to Mars and the sextile to the sun. So this indicates that this is a time that is rather fortunate for him. Venus, which is the planet in question, is in between a sextile to Saturn and a conjunction to Mercury. None of the orbs are strong enough, but you can see that it's a favorable time for him. But there's nothing to indicate that this is a special day for him. We can understand, we're talking about the Nixon pardon now. We can understand that he was a so-called accidental president and that he had a lot of good things going for him at that time. But there is nothing that clinches that this was a time for him. Now, at the moment of this, we will use in this case, because it's exact, the exact time of the pardon, the moon was right on top of Venus. And Venus is the planet that does that trine, and Venus is one of his more popular and more positive planets. So that's a fairly decent indicator. Let's see, what else is there? Jupiter does something, but Jupiter, I can't find anything more. All right. Pluto, now let's look at the transits. Pluto is trine to Venus, exactly trine to Venus. So there are two transiting things that indicate his positive popularity. And Uranus is at 25 degrees of Libra, and it is square to the natal Neptune. That doesn't seem relevant or doesn't seem pertinent. Now there are two questions we want to ask. Was it a good thing to have pardoned Nixon? Even though I didn't like the politics of Nixon, and even though I think, destiny requires that people get the consequences of their cause, I think Gerald Ford did a very good thing. Because there would, with ongoing struggles over Nixon and his character, the nation would have been in turmoil for months, if not years, after the resignation of Nixon. So once the complete pardon was given and it couldn't be undone, that settled the matter. And the nation could get down to business. The other question we want to ask, is there enough to indicate from the transits and progressions that that transits and progressions are accurate means for determining important events in life? From the transits, surely it appears that way. From the progressions, there are a lot of positive progressions, that would indicate his, doing well with the power that was given to him, but they're not a lead pipe cinch to say that this is, this is indisputable. So I would give this a moderate positive for the techniques that are commonly used by astrologers. All right, ready to look at the next horoscope. All right, this is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is still alive, 100 years old. He is a very good human being. Everything in his life points to him being a very good human being. He was a questionable president. And you want to look into that. First, let's look at the basic chart. The sun, the natal sun, is in the 12th house. How he got to be president out of the obscurity that he came from is quite remarkable. The natal sun forms a broad square to Pluto and a broad sextile. Oh, yeah, no, yeah. Oh, no, that's it, just basically the broad square to Pluto. Meaning he has difficulty with ideals. He's a Baptist, to this very day, a pretty conservative Baptist. He lives a highly moral life and a spiritual life, but some of the tenets of the Baptist church to which he belongs are pretty, not reactionary, compared to some religions, but they're quite conservative. Let's look at some other things. The moon, which is in the first house, is trine to Pluto. So in some ways, this represents a very high idealistic thing. I would say that the trine of the moon to Pluto indicates the very strong faith that he has, and he uses it. Anything else here? Mercury is, in the natal chart, Mercury is opposite to Uranus, and Uranus is square to Jupiter. Together, the whole combination of Mercury, Uranus, and Jupiter is a little bit wishy-washy. Not easy to come to a resolute decision. The same is true also of the Sun in Libra, is like that. The most famous or infamous, because we're dealing with the 10th house here, is Venus conjoins Neptune and they oppose Mars. The Venus opposite Mars is the stronger. And that was no help to him, because Playboy magazine did an interview of him in which he said, yes, there are times I see women and I have lust in my heart. He was an honest man, and that Mars-Mercury indicates somebody who's willing to tell it all, and he shouldn't have told it all, but he did. And he was also had odd things happen again, famous for not only for admitting to lust, which he was a saint compared to Donald Trump, but the Neptune factor in the 10th house, he was famous for odd things that happened to him. He was out in a boat, rowing in a boat, and a rabbit that was being chased by something or another was swimming and jumped into the boat to preserve its life. And everybody thought that was really weird. All right, now let's try to get down to business and see what is what. In the progressions, there's nothing, really, nothing in the progressions at all. The moon is at 17 degrees of Scorpio. It's not close enough to its natal position, and it's certainly not enough to be sextile to Mercury. So we can say from the progressions, there is nothing really there. There's something unusual that I don't know how to interpret, but if I could remember the history or take the time to study it, the progressed Mars conjoins the progressed Uranus, and that indicates some kind of energy that I don't know of. In the transits, Saturn is, I should talk about what the Iran hostage situation was. A lot of the unpopularity of Jimmy Carter came because he stood by ideals in ways that outraged the people. We're again talking about the Sun square to Pluto. For example, because of Russia's invasion of Afghanistan, he refused to let United States attend the Olympics in Russia. Very unpopular, especially among the athletes and especially among the people who care to see America shine, because we probably would have won the most gold medals or whatever. So he was unpopular in that way. Now we have said that he was sort of wishy-washy. Libra is wishy-washy, and we have the Jupiter square Mercury and square Uranus, and it's a hard decision to make. Usually if there are special crises, it is Uranus has something to do with it. And the Iran-Contra situation was, what happened is that the United States had always installed a king of Iran. And then this was the beginning of the Islamic uprisings. And what happened is that the Sunni, the Shia Muslims in Iran overpowered the government, and they took over and made their own government, and they've been in power now. The supreme power is not with the president or the prime minister. The supreme power is with the leader of the Shia Muslims. And they didn't get out hostages, they didn't get people out of Iran before they were captured by the Muslims. And Jimmy Carter dilly-daddled, and he didn't do anything about it. And when he did do something, it was too little, too late, and he lost a lot of faith. And then there were religious situations came in, because the Shia Muslims certainly didn't want to give the hostages back to the president, who was a Christian. And so they didn't want to hold the hostages either and have reason for a major war. But what they did is they waited, and this was a big issue in the campaign. And Jimmy Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan. And the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president, the hostages were released. Now, is there anything that indicates this as a critical thing in his life? No. Now, at least looking at the progressions and transits is what I'm talking about. So this is a case that we have to make a decision, and it's up to each of us to make our own decision. Is this a matter of this is not a critical moment in the life of Jimmy Carter? Or does astrology not work? I've seen enough evidence in the other charts to know that astrology does not, that astrology does work. We've seen this is the third horoscope, and the other two were pretty clear positives. So I am inclined to think that this is a matter of, this was not as significant to his life as other things were. All right, let's look at the next chart. Oh, come on. Oh. Okay. This is Ronald Reagan. And there was an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. And this is the day that that happened. And we're thinking that this is possibly an astrologically significant date. Now, we could go into a very long side trip about the curse of Tumsquatka, who was the brother of the chief at the Battle of Tippecanoe. And after the Indians were defeated, the brother of the chief, I believe his name was Tumsquatka, made a curse that every president born, I don't know, every 20 years, I believe it was, will die in office. That's what the curse is. And it happened. But the astrology of it is very, it's way too long. We would be here most of the night talking about it. It has to do with what are called trigons of Saturn and Jupiter. That is, if a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter happens in the first degree of Aries, the next one will be approximately 243 degrees ahead in 3 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, because of the obliquity of orbits and angles of orbits, it isn't mathematically precise. But what happens is that conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter happen in an element, and as they happen, for about 120 years, they will stay in that element, fire, earth, air, or water, and those set off cycles. Now, but the conjunction, the first conjunction in an earth sign that didn't revert back to the fire sign was in the 8th house of the United States. And the 8th house is the house of death. So every president, whether there was a curse of Tumsquatka or not, that was born under a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in an earth sign died in office. Now, the Ronald Reagan's election was after a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Let's see where oh, here we're looking at the up here at the transiting Jupiter and Saturn. But it was in, if you look at that, it's in Libra, and so that's an air sign, and this is the first one in an air sign. This was in 1980. And the next one was in 2000, and that was again in an earth sign. It reverted back to the earth sign, but because this one in the air cycle was there, it broke the cycle, so that the next one in an earth sign did not result in the death of a president in office. So there was a threat on the life. I think Ronald Reagan was even wounded, but he was not. The wound was only superficial, and so that's just a little sideline. Somewhere in all the talks that I've given, there's one where I go into great detail about this. So let's look at the natal chart of Ronald Reagan. First, let's look at the sun. The sun is in Aquarius, and the United States seems to have a love affair with Aquarian presidents, Lincoln and Reagan. There was another one also. But the sun is square to Jupiter, which indicates he's a little bit careless. But the thing of it is that the sun and Jupiter are so positive that he's lovable even if he's careless. Also, in the first house, he has Mercury, and Mercury is opposite Neptune, so he confuses facts. This is the president that thought that trees polluted the atmosphere rather than cleansed it. What else do we have here? Saturn is conjoined to Venus, and they are trine to Mars. So that right there, he functions well. And he was considered the great orator, and he did have skill at speaking. No matter what he said, he said some awfully stupid things, but he was good at saying them. And another thing is that Pluto is opposite the ascendant. And I don't think that's necessarily an affliction. And this, to me, indicates that whatever he did, he was considered an authority. All right? Now we want to look and see if there is anything that would indicate in the progressions that this was the time of an assassination. There is almost nothing. Let's see. Oh, yes. The sun is square to natal Uranus. The progressed sun is square. And we said that again is, how would you say it? Irregular or extreme events happening suddenly. Is that enough? Because we have to look at the sun, because the sun indicates the fifth house. And is the progressed sun square to Uranus enough to indicate an assassination attempt? Maybe. It's enough to question. Then, when we look at the transits, the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction they're off a bit from being square to the natal Mars. They're closing in on a trine to Pluto, which would indicate some kind of protection, but there's really not enough there. At the time of the assassination, Neptune was very close to opposite to Pluto. Is there enough to say that to justify astrology in this? Maybe yes, maybe no. If we took into account the things like the lunations and some of the other things that we're going to be looking at again, maybe yes, maybe no. I like the fact that there is the square of the Sun and Uranus, but I don't know if that's enough. And what would touch it off? This is really difficult, and the next one is even more difficult to deal with. This is the horoscope of George H.W. Bush. And it's difficult for me to understand. The natal chart is fairly easy, but I don't know enough about the events of his life. He was Nixon's vice president. He was Reagan's vice president and came in on the shirt tails of Ronald Reagan and was elected president. It's a lovely chart. If we look, the sun in the natal chart is trine to Mars, and it forms a grand trine with the moon and Saturn in Libra. So it's an air sign grand trine, which is nothing to look down on. This is somebody that is exceptionally bright, knows things very well. There are difficulties, though. The sun forms an almost exact square with Uranus in the 8th house. He wasn't killed by an assassin, but he may have ordered a few assassinations, because the CIA was famous for taking out leaders that they didn't like in the hopes of getting somebody else to take their place. It's supposedly now there has been an act to stop them from doing that, but I don't think it has stopped. That if they want to get somebody out, they'll get somebody out. All right, is there anything more we want to look at here? Oh, the sun is also sextile to Neptune, which means that Neptune is sextile to the moon and Saturn. So it's a very complicated chart, and that means that Neptune is opposite Mars. But we have a sextile, a trine, and so it's a pretty lovely positive chart. Venus is square. Venus is square to the moon, and I don't know what to say about that. Maybe he doesn't understand women. What often happens is what we don't understand, we become subject to. And if we understand things, we can control it. But if we don't understand, we are controlled. Now, I'm not meaning to say that as CIA director or president or anything like that, that he was under the control of his wife, but you can be sure that in all social matters, Barbara Bush was the matriarch, and nobody messed with any of her kids, and even her son Neil got away with crime because Barbara Bush made such a strong statement, and it became almost a national edict, and he got away with some shady shenanigans. All right. What we want to look at is, now I don't know if this is an important event. See, I don't know all the events in his life. I would, I guess I could have taken the invasion of Iraq would probably have been a better one to take, because in the invasion of Iraq, he was publicly humiliated. He said, we had this white paper. He was trying to tell Saddam Hussein to get out of, what is it? Was it the United Arab Emirates? No. I forget who it was. It was another oil-rich country. And Saddam Hussein invaded, and George Bush gave him all sorts of warnings in a, with the white paper and everything. And what you might call the Secretary of State or the spokesman for Saddam Hussein, his name was, I think, was Tariq Aziz, and he just made a monkey out of Bush in the whole situation. All right, are there any progressions? None. So we're faced with one of these things again. Are there any transits? The Pluto, there are actually no progressions that are in a significant orb that would indicate this advancement. There are all kinds of transits. Jupiter is exactly trying to Neptune, and clearly espionage and spy work and things like that is a Neptunian thing. In fact, in this case, Neptune rules the work that the CIA does. So that in itself is almost enough to indicate. Let's see, is there anything more? Oh, Pluto is exactly square to its natal position, and that's very close. It's just 10 minutes from being exact. That would certainly indicate coming into power, and would certainly mean that he would, in some ways the CIA is almost as powerful as the presidency. So I don't know what more to say, except that in the transits, I think the Jupiter trine Neptune is enough by itself to indicate this kind of event. I don't know, didn't look at the inner planets, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, or even Mars. But again, this is not really convincing, but we're not sure that we have a legitimate event that we're looking at. Now we're over an hour already, but let's take a look at one more. And this is another difficult one. This is the horoscope of Bill Clinton. But before we go into it, somebody pointed out that I made an egregious error in the last time that we met. I said that the standoff was between Kennedy and Gorbachev. It was not. Gorbachev was much later. It was between Kennedy and Khrushchev. And the secret negotiations afterwards were between Kennedy and Khrushchev, which may have been a motivation of some people for getting rid of Kennedy. All right, this is for the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And again, I ask the same kind of questions because I followed this fairly closely when it was happening. And I think that all the moral issues aside of Clinton getting caught receiving a blowjob from an office intern certainly isn't a moral, a lovely moral character. But I think the way he handled it with finesse. He didn't let all of the proceedings bother him at all. They didn't, He just kept on doing his work in office, and then at the last minute, when the impeachment came, he just went along with it, and he knew he wouldn't be elected, that he could be found guilty, but he could not be removed because there weren't enough votes to do it. All right, we want to look at the natal character, and we've looked at this before, but here we see Mars very strongly conjoined to Neptune, which is always charisma. He was and still is a highly charismatic man. And because he is so pleasant and easygoing and loved in a charismatic way, he was very popular, extremely popular. But Venus is in this same conjunction, and Venus-Mars, as part of that conjunction, indicates that it's very likely that he used his charisma for, how would you say it, lascivious ends. He couldn't pass up an affair with a woman. Now, this whole combination of three planets is sextile to three planets in the 10th house. Mercury is strongly sextile to the Mars-Neptune, and Pluto is exactly square to Venus, exactly sextile to Venus, which is Hillary. I don't know why, but Hillary has remained in the marriage with him despite all of the other things, and that's the kind of thing you expect when there is a strong positive aspect between Pluto and Venus. It's a love that is enduring. I don't know what more to say about it. What other things are important in the chart? One that's going to come up repeatedly. 3 presidents were born in the same year, and they were born in 3 successive months. George W. Bush and Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. All 3 have this same aspect, and that is Uranus trine Jupiter. Uranus trine Jupiter. And I would assume that because it ushered 3 very different people, that it is some kind of special popularity aspect. I didn't look at it with relation to the United States chart. That would be an interesting thing to do, but there are a lot of interesting things to do in life that one doesn't have time to do. So all I can say is that crop of presidents, that's the only thing that they have in common, and that is something that was active in their charts in their becoming president. All right. We want to see if there were any progressions at the time of the impeachment. If we look here, the progressed Saturn, Saturn and Mercury are conjoined at birth, and very, very slowly Saturn has been moving forward, and it is extremely close to the conjunction with Mercury at the time of the impeachment. And that is certainly infamy. That is certainly being made a disgrace. So there's no doubt about that being something that is in the mix with all of this. Venus, yes, Venus was just coming out of this is Sun, and progressed Venus is out, just coming out of the square with the Sun. Now that doesn't mean that that was influential in this moment, but it harkens back to something else, and in this case, it harkened back to an illicit affair. The illicit affair occurred when Venus was back here exactly square to the Sun. So there's something, that's vindication, but it's not exact vindication, but it's something that you have to take into account as being something true. Mercury and Jupiter, by progression, are conjoined, and that sort of indicates his glib way, but they don't form an aspect of any sort that is meaningful. The Sun, by progression, is in 17 degrees of Libra, working toward the square of the Moon's nodes, but I don't know what that means. Are there any transits? The transiting Neptune is opposite Saturn, and though it is not exact, it certainly has to do with infamy. It certainly has to do with a downfall from fame. You could say the same thing about Uranus. Uranus is moving up to an opposition to Pluto, and that would indicate some kind of curtailment of power or something of that nature. Is there enough to vindicate astrology? In my eyes, yes, but I can't make decisions for everybody listening to this talk. I think it's up to each person to decide for themselves. Now, this is as far as we're going to go tonight. There are 4 more presidents that we can do, but I don't know if we will. And I want that decision to be made by you who will watch this, that follow this class. You know the mailing address, 99fots@gmail.com. Send me an email to say whether you want to continue doing this or not. I'm willing to go either way. I have all the material ready to do those last 4 horoscopes, and I would be happy to do them. But if you want to go on to other things with the class, I'm happy to do that either. Either one is fine for me. So let me know what you think, and we'll go from there. Send an email with your preference.